is I thank you for the invitation and for our host, Global Green, the opportunity to, what I'm going to do today, I hope, is kind of set the stage for these other speakers and share with you some of my maybe reminiscences or a little bit of vision for the district and a little bit of personal history and knowledge. I do run a program at the HSUS that is, batteries work.
There you go.
Wild Neighbors, yeah. But it was maybe, I was thinking about this morning, I think it was 29 years ago this month that I met Dave Mansky and Victoria Guerrero in a Park Service van up on the golf course at Rock Creek Park to go out with them for the very first time to look at potential trap sites for raccoons. Because Dave had been part of a big initiative to create interest and get going with a project to study urban raccoons. Very little information was known at the time about these animals. And a rabies outbreak was in Virginia headed for the district. And all of a sudden, we didn't know what that meant. We didn't know what the implications would be for people, for their pets, for exposures, for the public health and safety. So there was this big push to start this research project. That started, I connected as a kind of a postdoc position with Victoria over at UDC and ran their part of the project. And we had a bunch of money to do basic raccoon ecology and behavior, and I did that. When Dave left to go to Alaska 2 years later, in 1985, I got my foot in that Park Service door, and I kept it there. And I eventually became the biologist over at the Center for Urban Ecology, and that led to a lot of other things happening in addition to raccoons. But I did get the pleasure of about 10 years of research on those animals in the district. This isn't...
Oh, it should be.
Just press the middle.
There you go. You just have to push it hard.
Oh, okay.
On the other side.
Oh, on that side, okay. This is what the city looked like when we started their project.
I don't think so.
This is an early map. It says 1792 on it, for those of you who can't see. And the city has really come a long, long way. It, as we all know, was built on pretty marshy ground, and it has undergone some tremendous landform changes. This creek up here is, this is Tiger Creek, actually. It doesn't exist in that form anymore. It's not above ground anywhere in the city. It runs under the Capitol. And Rock Creek was preserved. A lot of natural space was preserved in the city. It is a beautiful city. It is maybe one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And I always show this slide to say, yes, it's beautiful, and these things in the foreground add to that beauty and add to that value for two reasons. One, because we like to see wild animals. We enjoy their presence. Two, because we know when they're there and when they're there in diversity that we have a healthier environment. So the tremendous contribution that this city makes to the promotion of wildlife in its diversity has to be acknowledged, has to be understood, and has to be a basis from which we begin to talk about what DC is and how we can make it even better. This is basically an urban forest. This is the Crestwood section subdivision right outside of Rock Creek. We did a breeding bird survey here in 2003, a citywide breeding bird survey. We documented 91 species, and then the biometricians who we were working with, John Sauer and Sam Droege, predicted that there were 115 different species of breeding birds in the District of Columbia, which is fabulous. I mean, that is almost as much diversity as you get in some pretty good areas outside of the city. And all of the amenities for animals like squirrels and raccoons and opossums are to be found here as well. This, of course, is Rock Creek, and it is one of our National Park Service's reserves areas within the district, of which, as Steve mentioned, there are a number. And these are jewels. These are places that have such integrity and such character and such a history, such a long association with us, that they are national monuments unto themselves. Rock Creek is the third oldest park, actually, in the national park system, maybe the fourth, but it was set aside in 1890 before it was brought into the system as a reserve area and protected and preserved, and the trees were not cut, and the land was not managed. It is, at 1,700 acres, probably one of the biggest urban parks that is not subject to management regimes. It's allowed, to the extent possible, to be left alone to manage itself. I think a lot of people in this room know that back in the Second World War, Roger Torrey Peterson was assigned here and would lead some classic walks along the C&O Canal with people like Shirley Briggs and others, and that this area was recognized very early as a kind of a biodiversity hotspot. You may not know that 50 years before that, Waldo McAtee was cataloging the different species in Washington, D.C., that Vernon Bailey did some taxonomy here and did some collections, and that the natural history of this area was being well explored and explained and examined as far back as the turn of the 20th century. In 1947, Lewis Hall published Spring in Washington, which is the very first book published about an urban biological community in the United States. 2 years earlier, Ronald Fritter had kind of beat him out by publishing The Natural History of London, which is the very first book ever published on plants and animals and natural communities in urban areas. But very early, DC was in the flow of all of that, and there were people here who were looking at the natural history of the area. John Kieran's classic book, Natural History of New York, wasn't published until 1954. I threw this in. It's not in D.C. proper, but it is just up the street. It is Plummer's Island in Cabin John, and it is the home, it's a 12-acre island. It's the home of the Washington Biologist Field Club, who have been meeting there since 1901. These are researchers, a lot of them from the Smithsonian, many of them now from Patuxent, who have been crawling over this place and cataloging, typologizing, collecting, and accessioning every single thing from the lichens all the way up to the mammals and all of the plants, and been doing it rigorously for 100 years, making this probably the best studied natural area in the United States. So that is a tremendous contribution to our understanding. All of these works contribute to our understanding and knowledge of this area, and when you begin to look and think about both the people and the institutional resources that we have here, you begin to realize that there is some real firepower here in Washington, D.C., and it's a real special place, and it has a real tremendous meaning to every American. And you begin to think about, wow, what can we do with this? How can we harness all of this energy and all of this power? I don't want, and part of this talk has got to be, focused on the problems that we have, because we do have conflicts with wildlife. And there are reasons for this. Part of those reasons are the very reasons that we so love the beauty of this city. This is a tree, tulip poplar, in Rock Creek Park, it's enormous by the standards of these trees found almost anywhere else in the country. It has been left alone for over 100 years, and it's done what tulip poplars do, which is to kind of hollow itself out, lose branches, create cavities, opportunities, homes for wild animals. And this tree, which is again off that Crestwood subdivision, was one that we regularly found many different raccoons in. It was kind of a raccoon hotel. And we collected hundreds and hundreds of scats from the base of this tree and analyzed what they were eating by season and did all kinds of neat things. But the point is, we don't have those trees. What do? We build artificial trees. And we create these environments in which these animals say that that's perfect for me. I can live there too. And they don't miss a beat. So they move in, and the homeowner begins to maybe get scratchy with fleas, or the dog runs over to the fireplace all the time and barks, and then they hear these twittering noises, and oh, there's birds in the chimney, and then somebody who knows what they're doing comes along and says, no, it's not birds, it's raccoons. And typically, almost everywhere, where these private businesses, the pest control folks, come out to deal with the problem of raccoons in the chimney, it ends up tragically for either the baby raccoons or the mother. There's either separation and disunion of that family, there's trapping and removal of the mother, and sometimes abandonment of the young. Those young have to go into rehabilitation. And we know there isn't yet, but there will be someday, a wildlife rehabilitator in the city. You'll hear about that. So it's a huge conundrum for everybody, and we were looking around for ways to deal with that kind of conundrum back in the early 200s, and we found a company in Toronto that was dealing with wildlife eviction, exclusion, and reunion in a way that was so totally novel that we immediately fixed on this as this, we want this. This is our model too. And what we did was we created Humane Wildlife Services, and John Griffin and Laurie Thiel, who've already introduced themselves, were our folks. They came on board to, 1, follow this model, 2, perfect this model, 3, apply this model in Washington, D.C. So since 2007, they've been running 2 vans out there doing jobs. I think about 40% of their jobs are actually in the district, maybe over 1,200 of those, probably quite more than 1,200 now. And it's a 4-fee service. People pay for our service because we're running a business and because we're trying to create a model business that, you know, will be adopted by others in other communities. It's very simple what we do. It's simple, but it's complex. You go into the home, you find out what the problem is. The problem in this case is raccoons living in that chimney, because there's a beautiful little smoke shelf on the fireplace chimney, and Mom comes down and says, I'm going to give birth here. This is perfect. It's secure, it's quiet, it's all, you know, there's no fires going, it's all good for me. She gives birth, the kids get older and they get rambunctious and they start making noise, and then the dog goes crazy, or the fleas get in the living room and people start to notice that they're there. And they want those animals out. So fine, we come, we take the animals out, we chase Mom out, she's outside waiting, cussing us, and we get the babies. We put the babies in a specially built reunion box. That reunion box goes up on the roof, and it's put in a place where she will hear them when she goes back to get in that chimney, which she can now not get in because it is protected by a chimney cap. So, faced with this, and faced with the fact that she has a litter to take care of here, what does she do? She picks them up and moves them to another known den site. And thanks to the 10 years of research that we did in Rock Creek Park, we know that when you follow these animals around, we had radio collars on them, we followed over 100 of them, they always have multiple den sites. They may den in the chimney, but they also know about 4 trees in the neighborhood that they'll use too. Mom comes back, she picks her kids up, she has 5 kids or 4 kids, she has 4 kids. How many trips does she make? 5, because raccoons can't count. So she has to come back and run that last time. They can't count. Maybe they can count to 3. But she'll come back and she'll visit that last time, and when she has the whole litter moved, and this may take her all night to do, they'll be ensconced in the new home. The homeowner's problem will be solved permanently because of the cap that excludes animals from the chimney. And the raccoon will just go about in her known home range, knowing where the resources are, doing what urban raccoons do, which is to mostly stay 99.99% of the time out of our way, go about their business quietly, and be part of this healthy and whole environment that when we begin to look, and if you drive home late at night, you probably see more of it than you ever do during the day, it begins to look like a natural community, a biotic community, of which we are part and they are part, and we think it all works. Now, it would be remiss of me not to say that there are some serious conflicts out there right now. And our friends in the National Park Service, of which I used to be a part, and I actually got involved in the ground floor on some of these issues, are dealing with white-tailed deer in Rock Creek Park and Canada geese over on the Anacostia. And we could spend an entire day talking about the issues associated with these problems and what to do about them and how to implement that in a holistic and comprehensive way, and how to follow integrated pest management practices and methods and all those other things that are part and parcel of this. We don't have time to do that, so I'm going to leave you with a thought. I've been doing some work lately and some teaching in an area called conflict resolution, wildlife conflict resolution. There actually is a science now that's evolving about conflicts and about how to resolve them. It's based on resolving conflicts between humans. So it involves mediation and conciliation and sometimes reconciliation. Neat stuff. There's an idea out there right now that we need to recognize, acknowledge, and deal in a different way with what are called wicked problems. A wicked problem isn't a bad problem. It doesn't mean it's nasty or foul, or it doesn't mean, if you were from Boston, you know that was a wicked beer I had last night. No, it doesn't mean that either. What it means is problems that don't have technical solutions. So you're an engineer, you're building a bridge, you have to deal with stress loads, you know what the traffic volume is going to be, and you create a model, and you build that bridge. And you put it in place, and it works. That's an engineering solution, and we are great at that. You're the same engineer doing all the same things. You're putting the bridge over an incredibly sensitive ecological area. All of a sudden, you don't just have a simple problem to solve. You have people here, maybe indigenous people who have rights and ownership, and you have people who have a claim based on environmental values, and you have all of these other things that suddenly come into play. And you have to deal with that, and you have to have a whole different set of algorithms to work with and to work through in order to acknowledge and understand what claims others are making and be able to deal with them in a realistic way. The District of Columbia, thanks to Councilmember Cheh, has taken a tremendous step forward on the first part, that homeowner complaint thing, the animal causing a nuisance but not really being a widespread problem, by implementing the DC Wildlife Protection Act. This is the most progressive piece of law in the country regarding wildlife, and that is a nuisance or that causes a problem locally, and it is, I think, it is a foundation upon which we can build a lot of better understanding and better approaches to some of these more complex problems. It really goes back to the environment. And I'm the first to say this, but people think it's strange when I do. Wildlife doesn't really matter. We're dealing with what is really urban ecology here. And what matters are soil and water and plant communities. I mean, these are the things that are the foundations upon which the wildlife builds and establishes itself. But the minute you start to mess with wildlife and fool around with, you know, we want to do this or do that, then suddenly you get people interested. You're not going to turn people out with an interest in soil nematodes or even sometimes, sadly, hydrological regimes. I mean, they just don't connect to those kinds of issues. They connect to the wild animals. They connect to the deer that they don't want to see killed, or the raccoon whose babies they don't want to see orphaned. So we use wildlife as kind of a way to focus people's attention and energy. And then that's why Chris's earlier remarks, I really appreciated those, because that's where we can really work together. We can take our wildlife problems and we can fold them into the larger environmental problems that are really so much harder to solve, so much bigger, and require so much more effort. This is Rock Creek, of course, before the fish ladder, back in the days when we were running around doing raccoons. And this is a beautiful summer day, lovely scene. And then in the winter we had, you know, a storm, probably not a big storm even, and all of the impervious surface above Rock Creek was bringing all this water and all this junk and garbage from the neighborhoods into the system, flushing it, scouring it out. This is where we have to, this is the level at which we have to acknowledge and begin to address the kinds of problems that we face. And the wildlife will do fine. The aquatic creatures that would live here now can have passage, and they will be fine as long as we control, or try to control, or mitigate, or minimize events such as these. Chris asked me for a little vision, too, and it's been a while since I've done any visionary things.
Just a little bit.
I have visions, but it's usually the kind that send the cats climbing the curtains, you know. When I was with the Park Service, I had the honor and privilege of working for the Department of State on a human-dominated systems directorate for our Man in the Biosphere program. Now, Man in the Biosphere is a United Nations initiative, and it's run mostly through UNESCO, but here in this country we run it through Department of State. And it's a very simple concept. You have an area that you want to protect and preserve. That's your core environmental area. So you do that by creating buffers around it and that mitigate and minimize the impacts that come into that core and then you have less concern about an unprotected area outside of that. New Jersey Pine Barrens is a great example of a biosphere reserve that has a core, and then there's influence because of that core on who can develop and how much they can develop and where they can put things and how much they can mess with the waterways outside the barrens for a certain distance, and then they relax further out. Well, here's my vision. Take Washington, D.C. and kind of reverse or flip that biosphere concept and recognize that the core here, which is our urban city, we actually have a monumental core to begin with anyway, is the area that we focus on, that we focus attention, energy, synergy. We take all of these resources that we've got. You've got some of the most constructive, brilliant people in the world working here in the environmental communities, not to mention all of the researchers. Bring them all together, say, what do we do to really preserve this core? What does it take? What does it need? What do we need? And then talk about influencing further out and further out in order to enhance the protections for that core. So that's my vision.